under the radar screen. So it's a huge category of the employed workforce. And currently their minimum wage is set at the very lowest of all the different categories of workers who have minimum wages set for them. So for example, there used to be a degree of parity between farm workers and domestic workers. Now with the big increase given to farm workers some 18 months ago, there's quite a big disparity. There's about a 600 Rand difference. So the work, the labor of domestic workers is extremely undervalued, both in monetary terms and in sort of moral terms.
Well, I guess it's the lowest because we look at these workers, they don't have super skills. But for me, it seems so low that you have no prospect of gaining any skills unless your employer supports you in that. But if you have a family and you're earning 1,800 Rand a month, you have no chance to go and up your skills.
Yeah, well, I mean, skills is a very big challenge in the sector. And, actually quite a lot of research has been done into what it takes to be a domestic worker. And although most domestic workers are doing what would be regarded as completely unskilled work, cleaning, with also large numbers also doing childcare and so on, but the majority do primarily cleaning. There's been a lot of research that goes into exactly what it takes to clean a house. Whether you're an unpaid domestic worker as a household member, or whether you're a paid domestic worker, that there's a lot of tacit knowledge that goes into the process of cleaning. And of course that's why you get so many madams complaining, because they have a certain standard and they expect a certain standard of their workers. So there is a certain tacit skill, but it goes unrecognized, and it goes unrecognized largely because it's seen as women's work and it's often hidden labor. So the question of recognizing skills becomes difficult because people who work in the traditional sort of way of measuring skills and rewarding skills don't know where to begin in measuring the skill involved in being a domestic labor. And so we have to open up the debate about how you measure skills and how you reward skills. And we have to start recognizing that often the acquisition of skills doesn't necessarily come with formal training. It often comes with observing, of learning off your elders and so on and so forth. So although generally speaking it's described as unskilled work, actually there is skill involved. And we need to find ways of recognizing that.
Well, you do say that they are undervalued. Can we go as far as saying that these workers are being exploited? Jacqueline Koch wrote a book, and a domestic worker said, "I've been a slave all my life." Is that this trap that you cannot get out of? And that was under apartheid, but it doesn't seem like the conditions have changed that much.
Well, I think the trap is caused in this country primarily because of the high levels of unemployment. That if there were jobs available in other sectors, that there wouldn't be such a difficulty in moving to other forms of employment. I mean, there's been some very interesting things happening in Brazil in the last few years, where they've significantly raised the minimum wage, the national minimum wage, which includes the minimum wage for domestic workers. And it's had the knock-on effect of actually creating jobs, because it's created more consumer demand, and so there's been, parallel to the strategy of increasing the minimum wage, the strategy of the Brazilian government has been to enhance the support for other sectors, and particularly the manufacturing sector. And interestingly, what's happened is that there's now a shortage of domestic workers in Brazil, because a lot of domestic workers have left domestic employment into the other sectors, which are better paid and above the national minimum wage, because there's been this expansion in employment.
That is incredibly interesting, but for South Africa, it seems that we still have this oversupply. We don't see those other sectors in the economy rising. So what does that mean? Does it mean authorities' hands are tied and we should keep the wages where they are? A lot of workers, we do have to accept that some employers won't employ somebody if it goes up too high.
Well, there is often the argument put that half a loaf is better than no loaf, and we completely reject that argument as Cosatu. Firstly, because we see increasing minimum wages, and particularly the introduction of a substantial and a decent national minimum wage, which we are striving towards, as being an economic instrument for actually creating employment. And if it goes hand in hand with these other strategies, like the Brazilians have done, in supporting local manufacturing and expanding employment in that way, we believe there's a win-win situation, because in the case of domestic workers, for example, obviously it has to go hand in hand with a radical increase in that national minimum wage. But if it's done across the board, it should have the ratcheting effect of creating more consumer demand and therefore helping to create employment.
Do you have a number? What should, in your mind, a domestic worker be earning?
Well, the demand at the moment of the Domestic Workers Union, who unfortunately are not with us this evening, but the Domestic Workers Union is putting in a pitch for the increase in the national minimum wage to 3,000, which is still way below the calculations that the Department of Health makes for the requirement of a household income in order to put a decent diet on the table. And they make a calculation of somewhere around 7,040 Rand for a family of 4. And assuming that most domestic workers are supporting more than 4 people, one could safely say that, one could argue that the minimum wage needs to be way above the 3,000 Rand that SABC is demanding. But having said that, obviously they're being pragmatic. They believe that a substantial increase is due. And obviously, if they get anywhere close to the 3,000 from the current 1.8, they would presumably be quite pleased. But obviously, in the long term, we have to be talking about much more than just tweaking the wages, but really introducing a radical shift in those minimum wages of all workers, but particularly of domestic workers.
I have so many more questions for you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we will follow this and perhaps speak to that Domestic Workers Union in future. And that was Jane Barrett from Cosatu.